All right. Good evening, everybody. Especially all of those that are live streaming from all over the United States, from all over the world. We're so grateful that you're with us here tonight. We're hosting Christians United for Israel organization. Randy Neal is going to be our speaker, and I've known Randy for, 7 to 10 years, something like that. I am the Washington State Director for Christians United for Israel. I've been so for several years. And I've been to several of the Washington, D.C. Conferences that they have in July. Of course, it was canceled last year. It's canceled this year. But Christians United for Israel is still very involved in helping Christians understand why it is important to support Israel, which is why we support Randy Neal and Christians United for Israel. As I said, he's the Western Regional Director, but he's over most of the United States and the UK, I hear now. I'm kidding. But I've been involved going to Texas every year also for the meeting for all the state directors and the like. A lot of wonderful people there who love the nation of Israel. They love the Bible. And let's give a big hand for my great friend, Randy Neal.
Thank you, Pastor Mark. It's just an honor to be here. I remember years ago we'd come up and we'd do a pastor's meeting or we'd do an event of some sort, and Pastor Mark would come out and very faithfully. And I wasn't quite sure what El Shaddai Ministries was. You know, I took a look at it and I'd have to kind of cock my head and squint my eye, and I wasn't, it took me a while to connect the dots and really appreciate, what it is and what it is not, and really re-examine the importance of looking at the Hebraic roots of the Christian faith, the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. And so a lot of folks are maybe reluctant to do that. They think that it could be a slippery slope that ends up kind of in a fringy area. But the reality is that when you really realize and appreciate the Jewishness of Jesus, the Jewish roots of your Christian faith, it just makes it that much richer, and it gives your grip that much stronger. And so we're very grateful for that. I'm the senior staffer with CUFI. Pastor John Hagee founded the organization in 2006. And a few months later, myself and an associate found ourselves as volunteers for the state of California, and we've been running to keep up with it ever since. So we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. So we're going to, we want to be respectful of your time. This is really about a 4-hour presentation that we're going to do in about 58 minutes. And so it's going to be a drive-by. It's going to be kind of scratching the surface or a cursory overview of a lot of things. The audience that we're addressing, the El Shaddai, followers of Pastor Mark or the congregation of El Shaddai, some of this stuff may be extremely elementary to you. We're not going to camp out there very long. What I really want to kind of make sure that we have time for is to take a look at what's unfolding in just the recent months. We've seen things in the recent years that were historic. Extremely encouraging, almost miraculous on some fronts. And I will not be boastful, but I will tell you that CUFI was, the Lord saw it good in His sight to use us in a small way to see some things come to fruition. And some of those things are now being threatened to be tampered with or worse. And so before we get to that, though, we want to just start from the beginning. And before we start at all, I want to just give you just a little bit of housekeeping. Even though we've grown significantly since the first time I met Pastor Mark, there's still a lot of folks that have not really heard of CUFI. We met a couple of them, and they're here with us this evening, so I don't want to be presumptuous in any way. We are an evangelical Christian ministry. We're not an ecumenical ministry. We're not an interfaith ministry. When I meet with a Jewish rabbi or when I meet with the director of the Jewish Federation in the city, I tell them unashamedly, and I hand them my card, and the first thing on it says Christians, as in Christians United for Israel, and I tell them, you know what that means? I believe that Jesus was the Messiah. I don't make a secret about that. I don't make an apology for that. But the caveat that separates our organization from a lot of other great, fabulous, noble Christian ministries that minister to Israel and the Jewish people is that we're not going to wait until they agree with us theologically before we're going to commit to stand with them unwaveringly. And so that's an important caveat, and some folks can't quite wrap their brain around that. Second thing is is that being pro-Israel is not synonymous with being anti-Arab. A lot of folks can't wrap their brain around that. God loves all of his kids, and the worst enemies that the Palestinian people have ever had are their own leaders that have kept their boot on their throat and have created them into a festering wound to demonize and delegitimize Israel in the eyes of the international community. And so the quicker that somebody can point that out as the reality without trying to turn Israel into the scapegoat for that, the better everybody else is. So we're just going to go ahead and embark, and if you would just enjoy this very short video. I see that Jill's got us on the feed, so from this point on, we're going to just switch to the media that we have at hand for you, and I'll just do the voice over, and hopefully by the end of this hour, you will have learned a few things, you'll have connected a few dots and filled in a few blanks.
As I look across this chapel, I see familiar faces of America's spiritual giants and spiritual leaders who give spiritual guidance to tens of millions of people in this great nation and around the world.
When Pastor John Hagee and his wife received a commission from the Holy Spirit, they obeyed the call.
Christians United for Israel is helping build bridges of understanding between our two nations by educating Christians about the importance of a safe and secure Israel while promoting peace in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for every Christian to stand up and speak up for Israel loudly and clearly right now.
15 years later, what began in San Antonio with 400 leaders exploded into a movement unlike any other.
We welcome the 6,000 delegates that have come to Washington, D.C. for the 10th annual Christians United for Israel National Summit. Welcome to the 11th annual, welcome to the 14th annual Summit Conference.
15 years, 10 million members strong.
Hello, CUFI!
We welcome our television audience across America and around the world.
And we've only just begun.
Pastor John Hagee, my thanks for your leadership and your ministry. It has made a difference for America and for Israel.
I want to thank you on behalf of all the people of Israel, and I want to thank the thousands of you who've come to Washington from across America to stand with Israel.
CUFI has played a leading role in the efforts to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions, hinder terrorist groups Hamas and Hezbollah.
You know the stories, but we've implemented the strongest pressure campaign in history against the Iranian regime, and we are not done. And we've honored Israel's decision to claim the Golan Heights as its own.
Strengthen the U.S.-Israel alliance. Combat anti-Semitism.
I am the primary sponsor of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act.
We welcome the distinguished members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. We welcome ambassadors representing their nations from around the world.
This organization gives the human being hope because there is a lot of dark out there.
We support Israel because we are Bible-believing Christians.
Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in the nation with over 10 million members. For such a time as this, for Zion's sake, we will not be silent. We are CUFI.
So we're 15 years old, but we're over 30 years in the making. And an attempt was made to try to gather Christian pastors together and cast this vision, the importance of putting down our differences and allowing the Lord to use Israel to unite us. But that non-conversionary dynamic, that the ability to just do an educational, informational event that didn't have a half Nelson arm twisting altar call, just wasn't something that the pastors could quite wrap their brain around at that time. And so it was kind of put on pause. And fast forward, a few years went by, and then in 2005, a man by the name of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad asked the world to imagine itself without Zionism. Does anybody know the last two words of that quote? He said, imagine a world without Zionism and America. And he boldly said that Israel should be wiped off the map. He was in the express lane to get Iran's nuclear weapons. And that really was the trigger that prompted Pastor Hagee to re-examine whether perhaps this was time to revisit the merit of having an organization like this. He called a number of pastors whose names you would all recognize. They all said, I think it's time. And he gathered 400 Christian leaders together in 2006, and today we're at 10 million. I say that because we were originally launched to try to be a bulwark in Washington, D.C., to mobilize, to let our elected officials know it's not just your Jewish constituents that want strong U.S.-Israel relations and are concerned about the safety and security of Israel. We're Christian constituents. We vote people in and we vote people out, and we don't think it's a great idea to let nuclear weapons go into the hands of a maniacal dictator. And so that was really what really launched us. But that has transitioned as sanctions got tougher and as Iran had a tougher time and things started to turn. Our eye and direction and focus was forced to pivot towards the rise of anti-Semitism right here in the United States. Historic highs around the world, but here in the United States too, not just on our college campuses, also into our churches and even into some of the offices on Capitol Hill. And so that's really what launched us, and now we find ourselves at that later state. And at the same time, Iran is becoming a nuclear threat once again. But people say, why do you stand with Israel? They think that we are trying to usher in the apocalypse or something. They think that we have some kind of end time goal. And the reality is we stand with Israel because as evangelical Christians, we believe that the Bible commands us to. From the first book to the last, you can see that there's a thread, that there's a plan and purpose, and that God has a love and a burden and affinity for Israel and the Jewish people. And I believe, and I've said this to Pastor Hagee, and I think most anybody would agree, you have to go to certain seminaries to be taught to not see the Israel biblical mandate in the Bible. I know I know that sounds outlandish, but the reality is that if you are simply literate and you choose to read your Bible, and I would challenge you, if you're here, if you have not already done so, reread your Bible, just under the auspices of seeing what it says about Israel. And you will, the absolute least, the worst thing that's going to happen to you when you come out the other end is that you're going to be reminded that your faith rests in a God that's in the business of keeping his promises. We believe that you see it when you just take a look in the very first book in Genesis. The Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you see to the north, south, east, west, all the land that I will give you and your offspring forever. And here we have to ask the question, the Lord that created the universe, that your faith rests in, that your salvation rests in, when he uses the word forever, how long does he mean? Abraham asked him, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? And a few chapters down, I'll establish my covenant as an everlasting, there's that word again, everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Genesis 17 again, and God said, yes, but your wife Sarah, then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And when God made this promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. Look at Hebrews 6. I don't want to, I got to be careful and mindful what I'm saying, but when we were all kids, at least as little boys, when we wanted to make sure that somebody really meant what they were saying, we'd say, do you swear to God? And that's exactly what God is doing right here. He's swearing to himself. He's making it very clear that he's going to keep this covenant because there's no power higher than him to swear by. Romans 11 is, if you take a look at Romans 9, 10, and 11, those are really the chapters that really unpack God's plans and purposes and desire for the Jewish people. I asked them, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people, for whom he foreknew. Don't you know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? Romans 11:17. Some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap. Do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. That is a fairly gentle, somewhat stern warning in other translations that Paul gave to the early church. In other words, don't get all haughty and arrogant, thinking that it's all about you. You are simply grafted in. You're not the root system holding everything up. That's an early warning that the church did not heed, and we've got over 1,900 years of some of the most un-Christ-like history, chapter after chapter after chapter after chapter, under the banner of Christendom. You can't self-loathe about it, can't rewrite it. If you stare in the rearview mirror too long, you'll run off the road. But you can commit to change the trend by being aware that it's trying to take its mark on the international stage again. And if you think that's an overstatement, think again, because it has taken its mark on the international stage again. Romans 15:27, this is referring to the Gentiles, but they realized that the Jews had been the keeper of the Word of God. They were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them, for the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings. They owe it to the Jews to share with them in their material blessings. Matthew 25, this is one that we hear a lot about during Christmas time. The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The problem is as applicable and appropriate as that is to challenge people at Christmas time or all year long to help one another, he's talking about his fellow Jews at the time. Now I'm going to have to, just bear with me. This may feel like we're kind of on a cobblestone road sometimes, because I do want to inject a couple of teaching points. You know, when we bring pastors, and Pastor Mark has been to Israel many, many times, and a couple times with CUFI, and one of the things, and God bless them, and I love them, and it's endearing. But pastors, especially those that have never been, they'll ask, "Are we sure that we're going to go to the steps? Are we sure?" They want to go to one of those 2,000-year-old steps where they know that that Jesus or Paul had tread upon, and they want to do it too. They don't need to go there to have their faith confirmed, but there's something about it they want to confirm. I've been told by a guide that a friend of his actually had the privilege of guiding Neil Armstrong, the first astronaut to land on the moon. And Neil Armstrong begged him to take him to the southern steps, climbed up to the top of them, confirmed that these were the original pavers, walked from one end to the other very slowly, came back to him with tears running down his cheeks, and said, "Those are the most important steps I've ever taken in my life." With all that said, it's extremely important for us to realize God is doing things today. And that if you're not careful, if you go to Israel, you could miss the miracles he's doing today at 40 miles an hour through the bus window. And so Ezekiel 36, the desolate land will be cultivated, and instead of lying desolate in the sight of all who pass through it, they will say, "This land that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities that were lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited." Now I get a twofer on this one, because usually we're just going to be talking about the fulfillment of these predictive prophecies. But this is a great teaching moment as well, because Israel, if you've got a son or daughter or a nephew or a niece that happens to be in a university or college campus somewhere, especially a little bit northeast of here, then there's a high likelihood that they may have a professor that would want them to believe that Israel is a land-stealing, territory-occupying, or I should say a land-stealing, territory-expanding occupier. And the reality is people just don't know their history. Up until May 14th of 1948, there was not one Jew on 1 inch of land in then Palestine that they did not pay through the nose at highway robbery prices. The only land that an Arab could sell a Jew without being hurled off of a building the next day for collaborating with the enemy was land that would be deemed so worthless that it made the fool out of the buyer. A sand dune that you couldn't build upon, or fields like this, a malaria-infested swampland that would be deadly to even approach. But if you give malaria-infested swampland to Jewish immigrants, and they are armed with Western agriculture technology, this is what they do. This is the exact same valley. You take a look at the Hula Valley. That's the Hula Valley in 1920. Those guys are wearing masks for the malaria-infested mosquitoes, and they're actually literally risking their lives for the sake of their grandkids, that they will inherit a land that they may never see in their lifetime. But this is not the Hula Valley you see today. This is the Hula Valley that you see today. Now, if you go to the town of Jaffa, ancient town, Joppa is where you would see Simon the Tanner. It's where Peter was called to go visit Cornelius, or from Jaffa. It's an Arab town, goes all the way back to biblical times. And some Jews came up to the Arabs that had lived there, and they said, "We'd like to buy those sand dunes over there." And they laughed, and you want to buy the sand dunes over there? Yeah, we'd like to buy the sand dunes over there. And they basically sold them the sand dunes, because what are you going to do with sand dunes? And all the names went into a hat, and they pulled them out like lottery cards, and they said, so-and-so you get that sand dune, and so-and-so you get that sand dune, and Pastor Bilch, you get that sand dune over there. And they took all their sand dunes, and they took that, and they said, and by the way, I want to say, if you're going to build a city, you might as well make it beachfront property. Amen. And so this is outside the town of Jaffa. That's Tel Aviv a little more than 100 years ago. This is Tel Aviv today. And if you are interested in what the Bible says about Israel and the Jewish people, then you're very familiar with Genesis 1 through 3. And it's a cornerstone passage. You could do sermon after sermon after sermon on those 3 lines. I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth shall be blessed. That last line, if I hear 10 people quote Genesis 12:3, 9 of them leave off the last line. They always say, I'll bless those that bless thee, I'll curse you that curse thee, but 9 of them leave off, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And that's the one that's exploding with fulfillment today. This tiny little nation the size of New Jersey is one of the most major contributors to the international community when it comes to do with technology that is driving to save lives, to extend life, to enhance the quality of life. And here you have, we just had Passover not very long ago. Every Passover this prayer is said. I don't have to tell you, this is El Shaddai Ministries. You know that this far better than I. Suffice it to say that at every Passover they say this prayer, and it boils down to, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. That's right. And then we see the birth of anti-Semitism, Exodus 1:8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come and let us shrewdly deal with them, lest they multiply. And of course, we're talking about Ramses, the birth of anti-Semitism. Babylonians, all they really wanted to do was harvest really the best of the intellect in Jerusalem, the doctors, the scholars, the architects, and bring them back to Babylon. They didn't destroy the city at first. They brought them back to Babylon and allowed them to actually create a Jewish community there where they could keep all their traditions and religious practices intact. It's as though God had gone, as God had gone before what's going to be the exiles from Jerusalem. When they got a little bit too confident of running Jerusalem, they forgot that they weren't really in control. And the Babylonians came back in and said, you know what, if you're going to do it your way, then we'll just fix your wagon. And they destroyed the first temple. Exiles went to Babylon, and what do you know what they find? They found an intact operating Jewish community there to preserve. It's almost like a Tupperware container for them for their faith and their ways of life to be preserved. Fast forward again, here we have, Queen Esther and Haman. Haman, is just agitated with Mordecai's refusal to bend his knee when he rides by, and gets to the point, and it's a short book. You should reread it if you're not familiar with it. But we're going to circle back in a few minutes to the book of Esther, because the book of Esther, it really does cite the significance of what individuals can do if they keep their eyes open, if they are aware, and if they have the courage to appeal to the officials in charge. the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Now, those same professors that I told you, they are signing off. You might be aware that UNESCO, and not very terribly long ago, actually passed 3 blind vote resolutions that there's no Jewish history connected to the Temple Mount. They took the first vote. Nobody did it out publicly, but basically they did 3 votes, and they concluded there's no Jewish history connected to the Temple Mount. And they're trying to rewrite that. And the bottom line of those resolutions was that any reference to the Temple Mount in anything official with the UN, whether it be printed or from a lectern, would have to reference it in its Muslim names. Well, all you have to do is go to Rome, and you take a look at the Arch of Titus, and you'll see that menorah there in the lower left that's depicted there. When Titus got back, he built himself a 30-foot tall, 8-foot thick marble slab trophy of his achievements. And that's a lot of effort to do if that temple never stood there. You see the Crusades. We all learned the rhyme about, Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, but he couldn't leave for a day or two because all the ships were there because of the Inquisition and the mass exodus. And then we get to the Reformation. And I don't want to sling mud on the bride's gown, and I know that Martin Luther was the father of the church in many ways, and who knows why he turned the way that he did. Some people say that it had senility or whatever involved, but the bottom line is that he thought that through grace he'd crack the code to swing open the doors and usher in all the Jews to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't budge, he got himself a hard heart and a stiff neck and wrote some of the most vitriolic anti-Semitic words that any man has ever put pen to paper. Some so much so that Hitler, some of his most rallying speeches were simply quoting Martin Luther verbatim. The pogroms is something most folks, I'm surprised how few folks even know what the pogroms are. Essentially, it's a systematic, organized way of expelling an ethnic group from a geographical region. Doesn't necessarily mean genocide. It could, whatever means possible to get them to leave, just for their own convenience, oppression, but there is no red line. They will go to whatever means necessary. And in the book, Why the Jews by Dennis Prager, I caught myself reading about the pogroms. Now, we've all found ourselves watching a movie that probably was not rated as severely as it should have been, and we see an image, a graphic image, that we wish that we had not seen. We wish that we could unsee it. If you read a detailed graphic description of what was being done from one man to another during the pogroms, you'll wish that you could unread it. And you'll be grateful that you don't see a graphic image of it. Some of the most unspeakable, horrific things that one man is capable to do to another happened during the pogroms. And of course, it was replacement theology that's really the birth canal for anti-Semitism that led all the way and really culminated in the Holocaust. Many of you have read Isaiah 66 and didn't catch the fact that the way that it's written, the way that the words are framed, is kind of a pretzel or a mirror reflection in the order that it should be. Before she goes into labor, she gives birth. You don't give birth before you go into labor. Who has heard of such a thing? Who has seen such a thing? Can a country be born in a day or a nation be brought forth in a moment? And there's a lot of folks that think that that is exactly what happened on May 14th of 1948.
After nearly 2,000 years of exile and foreign domination, the Jewish people once again were free in their own land. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed Israel's official independence and modern rebirth. Celebration was short-lived. The next day, 5 Arab armies attacked Israel. Short on manpower, resources, and with almost no international assistance, Israel miraculously survived and even gained ground. But independence came at a great cost. Israel lost 6,373 people in the war. nearly 1% of its entire population. After more than a year of fighting, the Arab nations made armistice agreements with Israel and withdrew. For the first time in 2 millennia, the Jewish people had a national home and a strong defense force.
And before we get to this passage, it's very important because what I want to do is try to set up a couple of bookends on moral clarity, and this is going to be one of them, and that's May 14th of 1948. On May 14th of 1948, there were about 1,600 Jews living in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. Their lineage went back at least 1,000 years. Some scholars say at least 1,500 years. And by May 28th, when the Jordanians broke through the UN armistice, the internationally controlled area of Jerusalem, Jordanians broke through, and 2 weeks later there were not one. There was 0 Jews. They'd either been evicted, executed, or imprisoned. And a lot of people don't realize that. They destroyed the Jewish quarter and they left it in a rubble just as a trophy for themselves. Looking at this passage, Amos 9:14 through 15, and I will bring my people Israel back from exile. They will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them again. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land and never again be uprooted from the land I've given them. Never again. How long when you're the God in whom your faith rests, says never again. How long do you think he means? I was amazed to see Benjamin Netanyahu closed one of his UN speeches with this passage, and I'm not positive, but it looked like even the Arab delegates wanted to join in the standing ovation when he was done. Operation Eagle's Wings, Exodus 19, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. We're doing okay on time, so I'm going to take this moment to add another puzzle piece to this story, because if you really want to be a critical thinker about Israel, you need all of the puzzle pieces. You miss a few puzzle pieces and you don't really get the full picture. This is an important one. So 1948 rolls around, and all of a sudden you have this declaration of a Jewish state of Israel in the heart of what so recently was the Ottoman Empire, the Arab Emirate. And in many Muslim nations in North Africa and the Middle East, that was nothing less than an abomination. It was absolutely unspeakable, unthinkable that the Jews would have the audacity to do that. And the only place that these leaders, that these individuals had to take out their angst with this abomination were their own local Jewish communities who had been there before Islam was even a thought. And that was the case in Yemen. You've got thousands, about a little over 50,000 Yemenite Jews. You've got Great Britain that's holding back rioting crowds, of Arabs that are wanting to, hang them or do whatever they could do. And the call goes out. Israel does not have an air force where they can go in and do the airlift, but they can raise money around the world to do so. And so a call goes out for an emergency airlift, and one company steps up to bid on the project, and they are awarded the project, and it's warned right sternly, right out of the very get-go, extremely dangerous campaign, high likelihood of casualties, being shot at in the air and being bombed out on the ground. Alaska Airlines, sticks their neck out to actually take the project. And when they were, actually landing, Robert McGuire, the crackerjack pilot, who was a fighter pilot and also an Alaska bush pilot, they land the plane. The Yemenite Jews had never seen a plane up close before. They freak out. The idea of getting into one freaks them out a lot more. And what does he do? He calls back on his Catholic Sunday school classes. He draws up from Exodus 19. And he said, just like the Lord, brought the Israelites home on the wings of eagles, this is your eagle. He rips out the seats in the plane so that a plane that's supposed to carry 60 people carries 180 people. And you don't have to be a math ninja to know that if you've got a plane that's rated to carry 60 people, and you've got X, number of gallons of fuel, then you do the math and it'll go this far. Well, there wasn't a page in the operating manual on how far the fuel would take them if you had 3 times the load capacity. And he learned the hard way when he had to do an emergency landing in Egypt. Now they're hanging Jews in the town square in Cairo, and he just landed in Port Asad with a plane full of them. And the tower radios to him to explain, what his business is. And again, this guy's a fighter pilot. He's a bush pilot in Alaska, which means that he's got nerves of steel, and nothing probably makes his palms sweat at all. And tower radios down, state your business, and he radios back. I'm going to need every hospital bed. I'm going to need every ambulance, doctor, and nurse. I think every passenger on this plane has smallpox. Dead silence from the tower for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden there's a click on the mic, and he says, don't open the door, we're going to refuel you, you're to take off immediately.
In May 1967, 5 Arab armies began gathering on Israel's borders. Egyptian President Nasser and the governments of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia publicly declared their intention to wipe Israel off the map. The United Nations and every ally Israel turned to refused to intervene. Faced with utter annihilation and an Egyptian blockade off of a vital Israeli port, the Jewish state decided to strike first. On June 5th, the Israeli Air Force destroyed Egypt's planes while they sat on the ground. 2 days later, the IDF won the battle for Jerusalem. By June 10th, Israel had defeated the invaders and won control of huge new territories. Most of the land was returned in exchange for peace treaties, but Israel declared that Jerusalem would never be divided again.
Now, there's a mention in that short documentary that Israel did a preemptive strike on Egypt's Air Force. And now, there was a lot of people that at the time accused Israel of being a warmonger, of jumping the gun. Let's keep the context correct and set the frame properly. You've got to appreciate that for weeks, there have been radio waves coming in from Egypt. Your sons and daughters are going to be, kindling wood. Your streets are going to run with blood. They were threatening, and they had massive armies and air forces, and they were so seriously taken that they were about to be annihilated that they actually had rabbis consecrating public parks to turn them into mass grave cemeteries. They were amassing thousands of body bags, anticipating an absolute horrific, event. And so that's important for you to realize. That's why they did the preemptive strike. And of course, the Lord, intervened, and the Arab militaries slightly overestimated their military might. And this is what you see here from 1948 until June 5th of 67. This is what approximately, it kind of give and take, it ebbed and flowed a little bit. But that's really what you had with the UN armistice lines. And the armistice lines are temporary boundaries, dots on a map, not a permanent fence line. They're going to serve until both neighbors agree on what the permanent boundaries are going to be. There's just one problem with that. It requires a neighbor that thinks that you have the right to live next to them. And Israel has rarely had that opportunity. They kind of have that They kind of have that now with Jordan and Egypt. But when none of your neighbors think that you have the right to exist in the neighborhood, it's tough to figure out where you're going to put your fence line. And so this is June 5th of 1967. 6 days later, she quadruples her territory. She's now in possession of the Sinai that's rich with oil wells. She turns around and she gets a hold of the Arab League, an organization that was founded in 1945 for the sole purpose of preventing the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. That's the charter mission of the Arab League, and if you'll take a note, that's the organization the world turns to today to be the chief broker for the peace plan. They were founded to make sure that there was never a Jewish state in Palestine. And what does this, this territory expanding occupier that the professors tell our kids about, just quadruples her territory. And she turns around and she said, you know what? We want to give you back 97% of what we just won as spoils of war against aggressor nations. We're going to keep our reunified, holy, eternal capital city of Jerusalem, not giving that up. But 97%, our most precious biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria, we're going to give that back to you. We're going to give you back the Sinai and all its oil wells, the Golan, Gaza, and of course, they, wasn't accepted. But the problem is, before we get to the full story, is that when she reunified and sealed the city of Jerusalem. Cordon is all off. This is the area that we're going to keep and reclaim. And she takes a census, and the mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, he's notified that we just inherited 70,000 Arabs. Now, I told you what happened in 48 when there were 1,600 Jews. When Israel inherits 70,000 Arabs, what does she do with them? She asks them to all become full citizens. You have every right any Israeli Jew has. You can not just vote, you can run for office. You can't just pass through the property, you can buy it and own it and live on it. And about 10% of them take them up on their offer. And I guarantee you that the descendants of the other 90% wish that mom and dad had too.
After winning the Six-Day War, Israel controlled several territories captured from the invading Arab nations. Israel's new borders included the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the huge Sinai Peninsula, and the strategic Golan Heights. Israel offered to return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt and the Golan Heights to Syria on June 19, 1967. In exchange, Israel wanted peace agreements. The immediate answer was no. At the Arab League's Khartoum conference in Sudan, the League adopted an official position against Israel that included 3 infamous no's. No peace, no recognition, no negotiation. For 12 years, the 3 no's prevented all peace efforts. To this day, the 3 no's are a major obstacle to establishing peace between Israel and many of its neighbors.
No peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel, no recognition of Israel. The understanding the conflict in the Middle East is not that difficult. The solution to the conflict in the Middle East will probably require the Messiah to come. But understanding the root of the conflict is pretty simple. It's not Jewish, it's not Israeli refusal to recognize a Palestinian state. It's the Arab refusal to recognize a Jewish state. Now, this particular slide is easy to misunderstand because it appears that it is ticking off all of the wars that Israel's been in since '67. But the reality is that Israel's been in one continuous war. It just has, hot points that go up and down. Sometimes it's a little calmer than others. Psalm 83 is hauntingly appropriate for today. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more. Does that sound familiar at all? Yeah. It has a little reminiscence of not just Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, but if you have a moment, Google Hamas, go to their website, their English version, and just look at their charter mission. Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it. That's their opening statement. What more do you need to know? What are their intentions? Voted into office, actually as a political party. Palestinian Authority today is the successor of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded in 1964. So let's ask ourselves a rhetorical question. There were no Jews living in Gaza in 1964. And there were no Jews living in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, in 1964. So what was the PL going to liberate? What was the PLO going to liberate in 1964? They were going to liberate Israel proper from the Jews. Today, the Palestinian Authority is absolutely as bad as any of the other players. Hezbollah is basically an agent of Iran in Lebanon and Syria. Estimated 150,000 rockets, and don't get those confused with the rockets like the 2006 war. They're not just they're not street sign pipe bombs made out of ammonia nitrate propellant with a hand grenade and a bunch of bolts epoxied on as a warhead. These things are deadly. They can reach anywhere in Israel with precision accuracy. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, probably one of the most ferocious armies on the planet right now. A lot of people are not paying attention that Turkey is really trying to, fantasize and romanticize the idea of seeing the caliphate actually kind of come back into fruition, and they wouldn't mind being at the helm if it does. And they're getting bolder and bolder and bolder, pointing out that Jerusalem actually belongs to Turkey, not Jordan. Now, some of you, I know that Pastor Mark has hosted Irving Roth. I believe that on those occasions that the Holocaust survivor Irving Roth was streamed out. So if you're watching us from wherever you are in the audience, you may be familiar with Irving. And this excerpt is from a movie called Never Again, but it's also very timely for the points that we're trying to make right now. And by the way, Never Again is a documentary. It's available on Salem now.
It all began with words. 1.1 million Jews, 10% of the Jewish population of all of Europe, was brought here in that period of time and murdered. Based on propaganda and lies, things which have absolutely nothing to do with reality. In Germany, it began with words at the bottom of a newspaper. The Jews are our misfortune. It began in the 1920s, the first anti-Jewish law. That law says that do not buy anything from a Jew. Do not use any Jewish products. The first step is boycott. I call those signposts along the road to Auschwitz. The signs were there, big and bold. Nobody bothered to look at them. And that is why when 10 years ago the concept of a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel came along, I screamed and yelled at the top of my voice. It all began with words. 1.1 million Jews, 10% of the Jewish population of all of Europe, was brought here in that period of time and murdered. Based on propaganda and lies, things which have absolutely nothing to do with reality. In Germany, it began with words at the bottom of a newspaper. The Jews are our misfortune. It began in the 1920s, the first anti-Jewish law. That law says that do not buy anything from a Jew. Do not use any Jewish products. The first step is boycott. I call those signposts along the road to Auschwitz. The signs were there, big and bold. Nobody bothered to look at them. And that is why when 10 years ago the concept of a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel came along, I screamed and yelled at the top of my voice. If there's one thing we need to learn from the Holocaust, we must recognize those signposts along the road to Auschwitz.
It's important for us to remember that Hitler never did anything that he didn't say he was going to do. And more, the folks that are the tip of the spear for anti-Semitism are saying exactly what they're going to do, and people think it's so outlandish that they're not taken seriously. The boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is a seemingly political correct platform that appears to be nonviolent, but the ultimate destination, its true objective, is the destruction and dismantling of the state of Israel. Take a look at what the nation of Israel does for the world. If there's a hurricane, if there's a catastrophe, if there's an earthquake, if there's a typhoon or tsunami, Israel's the first one on the scene every single time. It's one of the most diverse nations on the country. That last line in Genesis 12:3, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The technology, I don't know, or it's, doesn't matter where you think or land on the COVID-19, conversation. The reality is Israel is leading the charge and trying to get the upper hand on it. But we have all, You know, if you're familiar with Genesis 12:3, you're also familiar with Psalm 122. And I would go into churches when, you know, Pastor Hagee asked us to launch this in 2006. I'd go into churches, and we would, you know, we'd come in and we'd see, as you did when you came into this church, or maybe your own church at home, when you come in and you see an Israeli flag up on the pulpit, and you think, wow, I'm among friends, and the pastor is all enthusiastic. You know, you're going to absolutely love, you know, the Williams family. They bring a group from the church to Israel every couple of years, and you're going to, you know, love our prayer ministry. They meet at 6 a.m. every Wednesday morning. They make sure that they pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And, you know, we send a check from our missions budget to a food closet in Tel Aviv every month, and we've given money to bring Jews from the former Soviet Union. And then I ask if there's, you know, if they would get involved in advocacy, in political action, to make sure that the U.S. continues to foster strong relations with Israel. And they recoil with repulsion, as though I had just said that God's not in control, or that prayer doesn't work, or that faith isn't enough. You know, we took a look earlier at Esther in passing, and it's important, you know, that when Mordecai took offense to when Haman took offense to Mordecai's refusal to bend his knee to him, he got the ear of the king, and he got the favor of the king, and he actually had the king. He wrote the law to have basically the Jews annihilated. And even though Esther caught him, even though Esther, you know, called him out, had a special banquet just to kind of unveil and shine some light on his evil plan, and he was hung on the very gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai. The reality is that the law that the king, you know, put in ink on the paper was still there. And, you know, a bad law against the Jews, it had gone out across all the provinces. It was still, those bulletins on that law, they were still in effect. And it was, you know, Esther pointed that out to the king, and the king considered it, and he appointed both her and Mordecai to rewrite it, to where that law had gone from annihilate the Jews to where the Jews have the right to take up arms and defend themselves against anybody that would mean harm to them and their family. You know, if you want to learn more, if you're not already familiar with CUFI, go to CUFI.org, but let me just point this out. This is going to sound a little callous, and forgive me, but I'm just going to set it out there. We're not looking for somebody to sign up just to get another email in our email box. We all get a couple more than we want on those. What we're asking is that we send out action alerts very occasionally, very rarely, and when things are really brewing up and Washington, D.C. needs our attention, we need people to stop what they're doing, to hit the pause button and take 3 minutes to make a phone call or to send an email. And if you can agree to that, then go to CUFI.org and sign up and say, I want to be part of that team. If you don't want to just get another email, then don't bother to do that. But I'm asking you that if you want to just take 3 minutes, and I'm going to show you a minute on how much a difference 3 minutes can make with an email or a phone call, but and then also sign up for our daily briefing, because it'll keep you up to date on what unfolded last night. The moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I'm not going to boast, but there's a significant reason that Pastor Hagee was asked to do the benediction when the ribbon was cut at that embassy. One of the most important things that this organization ever was a part of was the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force was, I mean, if you talk about a U.S., you know, citizen from Mayberry RFD, it was Taylor Force. He was an Eagle Scout. He was a graduate of the New Mexico Military Institute. He took that class. He went there to enhance his chances of getting into West Point Military Academy. Got into that, graduated, was a military veteran, was studying at the Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, when he was sent on an exchange student program to Israel, and he was on the boardwalk at Jaffa that we talked about a little while ago, when an Intifada stabber came down the boardwalk, and he was stabbing people that were in parked vehicles with their windows rolled down, but he stabbed one pedestrian, and that pedestrian was Taylor Force, a U.S. citizen. And what, you know, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of the Palestinian Authority, said was it was a terrible crime, terrible shame. That's what he said in English. But what he said in Arabic was we praise the martyr and we thank his widow for his service. And went on to explain that the martyr's widow, the murderer was killed by Israeli police, would get a stipend, approximately $800, and that she'd get it for every month for the rest of her life and for her family. And people were wondering, well, we're sending millions of dollars over there. Where are they getting that stipend from?
American graduate student and U.S. military veteran Taylor Force.
Taylor Force was a West Point graduate who served in Afghanistan and Iraq.
He was a first-year MBA student at Vanderbilt University.
Stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist outside Tel Aviv.
Taylor Force was attacked during the terror spree that engulfed the ancient Mediterranean port city of Jaffa.
U.S. taxpayer money, say critics, handed over to Palestinian terrorists and rewarding their relatives.
It's called the Taylor Force Act.
Called the Taylor Force Act, would cut off U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority if it does not stop the payments. The U.S. gives the Palestinian Authority more than $300 million a year, and the PA reportedly shells out that much to the families, about 7% of its total budget.
The U.S. House of Representatives has just passed the Taylor Force Act.
Congress passed the Taylor Force Act, named for the U.S. Army vet murdered by a Palestinian terrorist in Jaffa.
Today is to thank the leadership, the staff, and most importantly you, the members and friends of CUFI, for your early, strong, and obviously effective support of the Taylor Force Act.
And that bill was passed overwhelmingly. You know, that may sound bragging, like I'm trying to point out a notch in the belt of CUFI. Well, that, you know, we all breathed a sigh of relief when that bill passed. But I'm not here to point out in you know, some victory. I'm here to warn you that right now there are people in Washington, D.C. that don't like the Taylor Force Act, and they think that they need to find a passageway around it and bring hundreds of millions of dollars back to the PA without any assurances that it won't be used as an incentive to terror, just to kind of pay people to sit back down at the negotiating table. And you know, another thing that the organization CUFI did was pass the Never Again Education Act. We got an executive order to get that signed. And it's extremely important to realize that now there's millions of dollars of resources for teachers and schools that want to offer Holocaust curriculum, but they have to implement it at their local state Department of Education. That's what we're doing now. We're at the state level working tirelessly at that, and we'll be coming to your state, wherever you are in the U.S., sooner or later. The boycott, divestment, sanctions movement that we've already talked on, you know, as this presentation is being presented right now, just within the last 8 weeks, we've seen these laws on the books of West Virginia, Utah, and Idaho actually sweeping. CUFI is, you know, the COVID-19 may have Washington, D.C. shut down, but we're busy at the state level. Take a look at our Israel course. It's a 20-lesson Bible study that's available at CUFI.org, and it's great. You can do it as an individual, or you can do it as a small group study. Some pastors are even using it as the template for their midweek services. And perhaps one of the most important things that CUFI does or has ever done is raise up CUFI on campus, CUFI on campus, where we're actually equipping and educating college students, Christian college students, to guard their faith on secular and Christian campuses and to level the playing field, not to mute the critics of Israel, but to make sure that the Jewish students in Israel are fairly and honestly, you know, given a voice, and also that Israel is not cast as the demon and the prey that so many critics would have us believe that it is. But again, you know, visit us at CUFI.org, see if we're an organization. Make sure that, you know, do take a little time, check our oil, make sure that we line up with what the Lord's put on your heart to do with Israel. And if you would like to lock arms with us and join your voice with ours, we would be honored, as we are to be here with Pastor Mark at El Shaddai Ministries. And so I'm going to hand it back to him. Thank you for letting me be a guest in your house tonight, Pastor Mark.
All right, thank you very much. There are brochures, things they can pick up and fill out here on the table as well. Let's stand. We'll close in prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we just thank you so much for this time that we could spend educating ourselves, understanding why Christians, if they call themselves Christians, need to support your kids, your children, the people of Israel, the Jewish people. So we thank you so much that we've been able to spend this time very valuably, Father, and I just pray that people would have eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts to understand what you're accomplishing at this day in history and how we can participate and have your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In Yeshua's name, amen. We'll see you on Shabbat.